Viruses are much smaller than bacteria, so about 1%. So scientists didn't discover them until much, much later. So you needed a pretty good, I don't even know if you can see a virus through a microscope. You probably can. But certainly bacteria you can see under a microscope. So it's a Latin word for poison. So they're a type of pathogen. Now, they're not alive. So that seems really weird, doesn't it? That something wouldn't be alive, that would invade us and attack us. So it has a physical structure. Now, they aren't considered to be alive because they don't require nutrients, so they don't eat. They don't produce waste, so they're not breathing. Their only lifelike characteristic is that they reproduce, but even that isn't really reproduction. They more like replicate, but they're still not really doing that. So there's a lot of different viruses. They do have a genetic code, and this is important. So the genetic code is the instruction for making the virus. So what proteins does it need to put together? Kind of like building with Lego. When you're building something out of Lego, you have instructions and you have particular pieces. Well, viruses are made from proteins, and the instructions to make those proteins are that genetic code. A virus injects its genetic code into a cell through its membrane. Now, because the genetic code is in there, the cell reads it, or parts of the cell read it, and they end up making the virus. And they make the virus instead of parts of the cell. So the cell becomes damaged, or it even dies, but not before it produces thousands of copies of the virus. It's pretty mean. It's why you feel so sick. Influenza, measles, mumps, rubella, polio, chickenpox, herpes, and AIDS. Now, SARS is another one, and we're going to get to that. What we're looking at here is we're looking at smallpox, the Black Plague, anthrax, the Ebola virus, cholera, and this is the SARS coronavirus. Particularly relevant right now. We're in March 2020. 200 different viruses, reproduce very quickly. They attack the throat and nose. Colds aren't as bad, generally just a runny nose. The flu, so influenza, is far more aggressive. You get a fever, so you get through the first line of defense. Okay, when you're sick because of a virus, you can get a secondary infection. So bacteria can then get into you, and your immune system can't respond as well to it. So if you've heard of pneumonia, for instance, that's a secondary infection, which can happen after getting a virus. So eventually your body is going to produce antibodies. You can still have immunity to a virus, and many of them we have vaccines for, particularly the really bad ones. Coronavirus. So it's called COVID-19. 19 means is as in 2019. So it's caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome, and that's called SARS. And it mutates all the time. So basically, if you've had one version of coronavirus, it doesn't make you immune to others. By mutated, what I mean is that kind of the things on the outside of the virus are you no longer have the antibodies to shut them down. So these things change slightly. They replicate so quickly that the genetic code, there can be little misprints and stuff like that, leading to mutations, which make it so you're not immune to it anymore because it's changed just enough. The majority of cases in COVID-19 are mild. The biggest issues around it, it's highly contagious, and very high numbers of people are going to get it. The thing about this virus, or things that are very contagious, it means that just say 20% of the population gets it, and then they pretty much recover, and then we go back to business as usual. But a couple of people still had it, and they spread it, and it went. So it can seem like it disappears, and then you can have another outbreak. So that's why people are talking about this going on for years, essentially. Now, it might not be as severe after the first outbreak, may very well be the worst one. And then we'll learn from that experience to make sure if it happens again. So I think possibly 3 waves of this, but the second and third should not be as bad as the first. But Don't quote me on that. I don't really know how many waves there's going to be, but it's unlikely that we're going to get rid of it in one go. The only way we can really get rid of it is if we do develop a vaccine and that vaccine becomes available to everybody. The thing is about this virus, the infection numbers are so high that health systems fail. So if we only had a few people, we'd be right, we could handle that. But what's happening in other countries, now our health system's better than a lot of countries. So what's happening in less developed countries is that people are dying because there's no room for them in the hospital. Now we are going to have that happen here. I don't know if people will die, but we do have a shortage of intensive care beds, even here. The other problem is that we don't have enough testing equipment. As a global population, we're working really hard to make tests more available or develop different kinds of tests that are cheaper and faster and things like that. The other issue we have is basic protective gear for medical workers. This is really obvious in the US. There are nurses wearing garbage bags as protective equipment. There are people who are using the same face mask 4 days in a row. So 10% of the infections are actually medical workers. So we've got these people on the front line, not able to protect themselves properly, but what are they supposed to do? Can they just walk away and not help? They're in the medical industry, they're doctors and nurses and other sort of specialists for a reason. It's because they want to help people. And it's pretty shocking that we have governments putting people like that at such high risk. Plus, we need them. We need them to be well because they've got to help the rest of us. It is severe or lethal in some patients, even though it's mild in most. So the elderly, anyone with a compromised immune system, so people undergoing chemotherapy, people who perhaps have some childhood disease, and people who have respiratory issues. So people with cystic fibrosis, asthmatics, smokers, they're quite vulnerable because it does attack the respiratory system. The death rate is high because vulnerable people can't really avoid the disease, and due to the breakdown of health systems, they can't receive the treatment that they need. Plus, it's pretty vicious. It's not just because of the health system. People who have other severe illnesses or injury may not be able to receive the treatment that they need because the healthcare system is overwhelmed. So if you think of a car accident, obviously they're going to get treated, but very, very difficult. Maybe people with non-life-threatening problems, but severe, may not be able to get treatment, certainly not as quickly as they might like. So the thing about there's no cure. Viruses do not respond to antibiotics. I'm sure there are other remedies and things like that may help, but there's no vaccine for this mutation of the virus at this stage, and we're looking at least a year away because there's a lot of processes that a vaccine needs to go through even once it's developed, and we still don't have one. Haven't been able to make one yet. What you can do, so how we can limit the damage, we need to prevent the spread. Remember that you may not realise that you have the disease and could pass it on, particularly in young people. Young people don't make very good decisions. Most of the people who are watching this or listening to this are young people. Look around you at your peers, metaphorically, not physically with them. How many of them make good decisions? How many of them make selfish decisions? Yep, you get what I'm talking about. So, making bad decisions and passing it on. There's no point running around going, oh, I feel well, or I won't get sick. You're going to pass it on. Personal hygiene. So washing hands, controlling sneezing and coughing. That just means into a tissue, throw it away, into your elbow to stop it becoming airborne because that will spread it. Self-isolation in small groups. This is the hardest one. It's really unnatural for us. We're pretty social animals. And the thing about your small groups is you don't want to intermingle. So if you're in a small group like your family and you intermingle with one person from someone else's family and they pass it on to you, you're bringing it back to your family. Whilst small groups may be intermingling rarely, is probably not the biggest issue because then it'll still be contained to those two groups. It still spreads the disease. Physically apart and don't touch other people's items, i.e. phones. If you've got something on your phone, don't pass it to someone else. Phones are like Virus and bacteria factories, they're pathogen factories, they're all over them. How often do you clean your phone with disinfectant? How often is it near your face? So if you handed your phone over to somebody, they touch it, then you put it near your face, pretty good chance it's going to get in. So we need to close places where there are lots of people. That's why all the sport codes have shut down. So gyms, a lot of workplaces are shutting down, particularly if people can work away from home. This includes schools. Now I've got to admit that I've been particularly disappointed with the response from our government regarding schools. They keep talking about the fact that children aren't really going to get sick. Well, they can still spread it. It's not really about that, is it? Also by putting teachers at risk. Like, they're not children. They can get it and they can die from it. A lot of teachers are, in their 50s and 60s. So they're a little bit more vulnerable. We need to restrict travel. Again, so if someone's infected moving into a zone that has less infection, they're going to pass it on. And we've got to try not to overwhelm healthcare systems by presenting at hospital for non-urgent issues. Don't hoard medical supplies like face masks, and that's the sort of stuff. You saw how people behaved with toilet paper. They're all about themselves. Well, that's not going to work in this situation. We need to work together. If you have big concerns about the coronavirus, this is probably your go-to website. It's Johns Hopkins University of Medicine. I'll put the link in the description. So it gets updated regularly, telling you what's going on. We can see here the exponential curve that's going up, and it'll keep going up and keep getting steeper and steeper. So each day, so these are per day, so through February, March, we can see that yesterday had the most, so 63,000 people were diagnosed with it yesterday. The numbers here, so total confirmed, that's only people who have been tested positive. So for every person who's tested positive, there's probably 10 who haven't been tested. And that's not including, and there's probably even more than that, people who don't have any symptoms, like, they're not getting tested. But US has hit 100,000 people. Wonder how big that's going to go. Maybe bigger than 1 million. We've had 27,000 people die. Again, this is only reported deaths. 131,000 people recovered. Those numbers are frightening. So 27,000 people have died. Only 131,000 people reported recovered. This so many people have got it or have had it. So we've still got 400,000 people who have it. And we'll see what happens. Anyway, good website. Also tells you where in the world